They call it a gift, a warrant of trade, freedom from imperial law, the right to sail beyond the light of the Astronomicon, to claim, to conquer, to profit. But every gift from the Imperium is a curse in disguise. Alaric Vane learned that truth in the cold silence between stars, where faith thins and sanity unravels. His ship, the Vigilant Solace, was a cathedral of ruin and ambition, its crew half machines, half ghosts bound only by his word. Out there, past the Emperor's reach, he found something the Imperium had forgotten how to name. Not heresy, not salvation, something far worse. The Vigilant Solace moved like a dying god through the dark, its hull groaning with the slow ache of centuries. The void outside was silent, broken only by the hiss of venting plasma and the deep thrum of engines that hadn't seen true rest since the days of the heresy. Alaric Vane stood alone on the command pulpit, his gloved hand resting on the rail, eyes fixed on the viewing pane where the stars stretched into frozen eternity. Each one burned like a promise he had never learned to keep. The bridge was vast, shaped like a cathedral desecrated by machinery. Cogitators clicked in prayer, servo skulls drifted through incense smoke, and the ship's machine spirits murmured through the vox in fragmented liturgies. The crew below moved with mechanical obedience, navigators shrouded in silk, their third eyes hidden from mortal sight, and servitors twitching under the weight of cybernetic grafts. The air smelled of oil and burnt ozone. Every breath was a reminder that the void didn't forgive those who wandered too long without faith. "Warp trace detected," came the voice of Vox Officer Malin, distorted through her grill. Faint, possibly. Organic. Alaric turned, his coat trailing behind him like the shadow of a dying sun. He said nothing at first. In his silence, the hum of the ship seemed to grow louder, as though the Vigilant Solace itself awaited his command. Finally he spoke, softly, but with a gravity that silenced even the machine spirit's whispers. "Organic?" "Yes, my lord. It carries a pattern, human, or something that remembers being human." That was the kind of answer a rogue trader hated most. The void was full of things that pretended to be human, ghosts, echoes, demons wearing memory as flesh. Alaric's eyes narrowed as he reached for the data slate, scanning the readings with a practiced precision. The signal pulsed weakly like a dying heartbeat. Coordinates scrolled across the screen, tracing to a region unmarked by the Navi's charts, a dead zone on the edge of the Achernar Drift. He knew that region, or rather he remembered it through rumor and superstition. A place spoken of by voidfarers who swore they heard voices in the static, promises of forgotten technology, of worlds unclaimed since the Great Crusade. Few ever returned. Those who did spoke of light that bled and machines that wept. Malin hesitated before speaking again. "Orders, Captain." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the viewing pane, watching the reflection of his own face ripple against the starfield. The lines around his eyes were deep, not from age, but from seeing too much and remembering too little. He had been a rogue trader for nearly a century, long enough to outlive most of his crew, long enough to learn that every discovery carried a cost. But this was something different. The signal wasn't random. It was rhythmic, deliberate, almost like it was calling him. He turned back to Malin. "Bring us in," he said. The bridge shifted into motion. Runes flared to life, and the distant groan of the warp drives stirred beneath the deck like a restless leviathan. As the Vigilant Solace began to turn, Alaric felt the old familiar ache crawl behind his eyes, the subtle distortion of the Geller field as it prepared to part the veil between realities. The navigator's attendants began their hymns, chanting through metallic respirators as the ship's walls pulsed faintly with light. The moment before a warp jump was always the same, a silence so profound it became unbearable, like the breath of the universe being held. And then, without warning, he felt it. Not the cold bite of the warp, or the maddening pull of its currents. This was something else, a whisper, not in his mind but behind it. A wordless voice that brushed against his consciousness with a familiarity that made his stomach twist. It said nothing coherent. Yet he understood it all the same. "You should not have come back." His breath froze. For a heartbeat, the stars flickered. Then the void tore open. The warp bloomed like a wound in reality, flooding the bridge with sickly light. The Geller field roared to life, bending space around the ship as it plunged through the veil. Alaric's vision blurred. In that instant, the world became a smear of light and shadow, memory and madness. He felt the ship shudder violently as though something immense brushed against its hull, and in the chaos, in the screaming metal and the rising panic, Alaric saw something move within the warp itself. Not a demon, not a shadow, a face, one he knew. It smiled, and then everything went black. When Alaric opened his eyes, the world was quiet again. Too quiet. The hum of the Vigilant Solace's engines had softened to a low, uncertain murmur, as though the machine spirits themselves were afraid to breathe. Smoke drifted through the command deck like incense in a funeral temple. Emergency lumens flickered in the gloom, painting the bridge in the dull crimson of half-functioning power relays. He pushed himself to his feet, his boots scraping against the grated floor. For a moment he thought he was alone, until a faint sound broke through the haze. "My lord." Malin's voice cracked and trembling. She was slumped over her console, blood trickling from her nose. The Vox grill on her mask had melted slightly, the scent of scorched metal filling the air. Alaric moved to her side, checking her pulse. Weak but steady. The others weren't as fortunate. 3 servitors lay motionless, their augmetic limbs twitching in the dark, and one of the junior officers had been fused to his chair, skin seared into the cogitator's surface. The air reeked of burnt flesh. What happened? Alaric asked, though he already knew the answer was one no one would want to hear. Malin coughed, blood flecking the inside of her mask. We dropped out too soon, Lord. The warp, it fought us. He turned toward the viewing port. Outside there was no warp, no swirling madness, no lights that defied reason. Just emptiness, pure unending black, broken only by the faint glimmer of a single dying sun in the distance. It wasn't on any of their charts. Location? He asked. Malin hesitated. The cogitators can't confirm, Lord. Star patterns don't match anything in the archives. It's like we've been pulled out of real space entirely. Alaric said nothing. He could feel it. The cold weight pressing against the hull. The oppressive silence of a place that had forgotten what it meant to live. It wasn't the warp, but it wasn't real space either. Something between, a wound that hadn't healed. He walked toward the observation bay, hands clasped behind his back. Through the cracked glass he could see it. A planet. Small, desolate, shrouded in storms that moved too slowly to be natural. It looked almost peaceful from orbit. Almost. Scan it, he ordered. The cogitators whirred and clicked, their mechanical voices muttering in binary litany. After several seconds, a single data rune blinked onto the display. Atmosphere breathable, Malin said, voice steadier now. Population? Indeterminate. There are structures, but no active life signs detected. Ruins, perhaps. Alaric stared at the readings for a long time. Then quietly, prepare a lander. Malin looked up in disbelief. My lord, we don't know what did this to us. To enter orbit now, he cut her off with a look. If this place wanted us dead, we already would be. There was no bravado in his tone, just cold pragmatism. He had spent a lifetime navigating the edge between survival and damnation. This was no different. As he left the bridge, the corridor lights flickered erratically, casting long shadows across the bulkheads. Servo skulls hovered near the ceiling, their lenses turning to follow him as he passed. The Vigilant Solace was whispering now. Faint murmurs through the Vox, fragmented prayers in the language of the machine. He ignored them. The descent bay smelled of rust and promethium. The lander, an ancient Aquila shuttle, sat ready, its wings folded like a carrion bird at rest. A small team of armsmen waited by the ramp, their armor dull with age and their faces hidden behind visors. Status? Alaric asked. Systems green, Lord. Fuel reserves stable. We can make orbit and return twice over, replied the sergeant, his voice distorted by his helm. Good. We won't need a third trip. He stepped aboard, the deck trembling beneath him as the lander's engines came to life. The walls shook with restrained fury, dust falling from the ceiling as the clamps released. Through the viewport, the Vigilant Solace loomed above them like a shadowed titan, its hull scarred and silent. The descent was slow, uneasy. Static crawled through the Vox and the air outside shimmered like heat haze. Except there was no heat. No sound of re-entry. Just a quiet so vast it swallowed their thoughts. When they finally broke through the clouds, the surface revealed itself. It was a graveyard. The land stretched for miles, endless plains of blackened metal and rusted stone. Towers lay broken like the bones of dead gods, and what had once been cities were now nothing but skeletons of ferrocrete and dust. Yet amidst the ruin, something moved. Figures, distant, shrouded in the storms. Too small to be space marines, too deliberate to be ghosts. Life signs confirmed. Mullane's voice crackled through the Vox link from orbit. Humanoid, but their biosigns are degraded, like they've been half dead for centuries. The shuttle touched down near the edge of what had once been a grand plaza. The air outside was thin, tasting faintly of ash. Alaric descended the ramp, boots crunching against the dust. The silence of the world pressed down on him, heavier than any armor. Then he saw them, shapes emerging from the mist. Dozens of them, human, or what passed for human, skin pale and cracked, eyes hollow but still burning with something fierce. They wore remnants of imperial uniforms, rags and scraps twisted into makeshift armor. Some carried weapons that hadn't worked in generations. Others clutched icons of the emperor, worn smooth by desperate hands. One of them stepped forward, an old man with a rebreather hanging from his neck, the imperial aquila tattooed across his chest. He looked at Alaric, and something like recognition flickered in his eyes. "Are you?" The man's voice was brittle, as though it hadn't been used in years. "From Terra?" Alaric studied him, then replied, "Once." The man's expression broke, half relief, half terror. Then it's true. "The angels came back," Alaric frowned. "What angels?" The man fell to his knees, trembling. "The ones who brought the fire." "The ones who left us here." The air grew colder. Behind Alaric, one of his men shifted uneasily, and in that moment, through the broken silence of this dead world, Alaric understood something he had hoped would never be true. They hadn't found the lost. They had come back to the abandoned. The old man's words hung in the air like ash, light, fragile, but impossible to breathe through. Alaric did not answer him at first. He looked around the plaza again, at the bodies that were not corpses, the ruins that were not yet dead. The wind carried whispers through the broken arches, words that sounded like prayers half forgotten and half cursed. His boots clicked against the cracked ferrocrete as he approached the kneeling man. "Tell me," Alaric said quietly, "who left you here?" The man lifted his head, and for a moment Alaric could see what he had once been. A soldier, perhaps, or a guardsman, one of the millions who had carried lasguns and faith in equal measure, who had fought and bled for the promise of the Imperium. But now, his eyes held only the reflection of something broken. "They came from the sky," the man whispered. Their armor shone like gold, and their eyes burned with light. "They said they came to save us, to bring the Emperor's mercy." Alaric's jaw tightened. "And what did they bring instead?" "Judgment." The words seemed to echo through the ruined square, carried by the wind. "They came when the skies turned black." The man continued, his voice shaking. "When the storms swallowed the stars. We thought it was salvation, but they looked upon us and saw only corruption. They said the taint was in our blood, that we had forgotten the creed, that we were impure." Behind Alaric, one of the armsmen muttered a quiet curse. The old man's eyes filled with tears. "They burned the cities. They took the children first, said the Emperor would remake them. But the fires never stopped. Those of us who ran were hunted. Those who stayed prayed until their throats bled." He looked up at Alaric with trembling hands, reaching out as though to touch his armor. "And now you wear their colors." For the first time, Alaric felt the weight of his sigil, the rogue trader's seal, half sun and half eagle, glinting dully under the gray light. It was not the mark of those angels, but in this dying world there was no difference. "All who bore the Aquila were the same. Get him aboard the shuttle," Alaric ordered. "We'll take him to the ship." The armsman hesitated. "My lord, what if—" "Do it." They obeyed, though unease radiated from every movement. As the old man was carried up the ramp, the rest of the shapes in the storm began to gather. Women with hollow cheeks, children wrapped in tattered cloaks, men carrying relics that were more rust than metal. They stood at the edges of the square, silent, watching, no cries, no shouts. Just eyes, hundreds of them, staring as if they'd seen ghosts. When the ramp closed and the shuttle lifted off, the sound of the engines seemed to rip through the stillness like a wound reopening. Alaric watched the planet grow smaller beneath them, but the feeling did not leave him. The silence of that place had followed him aboard. Back on the vigilant Solace, the air was colder. The medici servitors took the old man to the infirmary, their mechanical limbs clattering softly against the deck. Malin met Alaric outside the chamber, her expression grim. "He's malnourished, dehydrated, lungs filled with dust," she said. "He shouldn't be alive." Alaric nodded. "And yet he is." She glanced toward the viewport. "Did you see the structures, Lord? The design is imperial but old, maybe from the Great Crusade era. If his story is true, this planet might have been abandoned for millennia." Alaric's gaze hardened. "The Imperium does not abandon. It forgets." He turned away before she could answer, his thoughts already unraveling into darker places. That night, if such a word had meaning here, he returned to the observation bay alone. The planet hung beneath them like a bruise on the void, faint light glimmering through the storm bands. Somewhere down there, the remnants of humanity clung to faith like a blade without a handle. He remembered the man's words. The angels came back. In his years among the stars, Alaric had seen many things. He had traded with Xenos under false banners, walked the skeletons of derelict ships that had drifted for 10,000 years, and once stared into the eyes of a custodian on Terra itself. But he had never seen angels, only men who thought they were. And yet, the old man's story stirred something in him. A name he dared not speak, the kind of judgment that only the adeptus astartes could bring. Could it be possible that a chapter, one of the Emperor's own, had condemned this world? He stared into the void until the reflection of the planet disappeared into the black. Behind him, the doors hissed open. Malin's voice came softly through the dark. "The old man is awake again. He's asking for you." Alaric did not move. "What does he want?" "He says he remembers your face." The air in the room seemed to vanish. Alaric turned slowly, eyes narrowing. "That's impossible," he said. Malin swallowed. "He says you were there, Lord, when the angels came." Alaric stood frozen for a long time, as though the words themselves had weight. The steady hum of the vigilant Solace's engines pressed against the walls, the heartbeat of a ship that had outlived more men than it had saved. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, almost too controlled. "Where is he?" "Infirmary cell 4, Malin said softly. "I've restrained him for his own safety, but he's lucid. He repeats your name, over and over." The corridors seemed longer than usual as Alaric walked them, each turn bathed in the dull glow of lumen strips flickering behind cracked glass. Crew members stepped aside when they saw him coming. The rogue trader's name carried weight and fear, even here, among those who owed him their lives. When the medici door opened, the scent of antiseptic and machine oil filled the air. The old man lay on a cot surrounded by droning servitors, their optics glowing faint red as they worked through rote tasks of care. His wrists were bound by soft restraints, yet his eyes, clouded and rimmed with crimson veins, followed Alaric's every step. "I remember you," the old man said. His voice was rough, almost more breath than sound. "You stood at the edge of the fire." Alaric stopped beside the bed. "You've mistaken me for someone else." The man shook his head. "No, you watched. You didn't wear armor, not like the others. But you were there behind them, watching as they took the children." Malane's breath caught, but Alaric did not react. His expression remained fixed, as though carved from iron. "Tell me what you saw." The old man's gaze drifted upward, past the ceiling, past the steel. The sky was full of ships, great silver things, burning with the light of the Emperor. "We thought we were saved. We were fools." The angels came down in gold and crimson, voices like thunder. They said our faith had faltered, that our prayers had grown weak. They gathered the faithful to test them. He swallowed hard, trembling. They brought out the machines, men with no faces, priests who spoke in binary hymns. They said it was mercy, cleansing, but it was screams, Captain. Endless screams, and you watched. Just as you watch me now. Alaric's jaw tightened. "How long ago?" "I don't know. Time broke when the angels left. The storms came and the stars vanished. But it was you." The same eyes, the same voice. The man began to shake, whispering something beneath his breath. A prayer, perhaps, or a curse. The servitor's optics flared in response, a faint pulse of red through the shadows. Milan took a step forward. "Captain," Alaric raised a hand, silencing her. He leaned closer to the old man, studying him with the intensity of a predator scenting truth. "You think you've seen me before," he said. "But look at me closely. Do I look untouched by age, by time?" The man's eyes flicked across his face, confusion mixing with terror. "You haven't changed. Or perhaps you've simply seen too many ghosts." He turned toward the exit, his coat brushing against the edge of the cot. But before he reached the door, the old man spoke again. "They said the Emperor would send another, one who walks among the dead but carries no shadow. He would come to finish what they began." Alaric paused. The words lingered like static in his mind, crawling beneath the surface of reason. "What else did they say?" he asked without turning. The man smiled faintly, a terrible knowing smile. "They said his ship would bear the name Solace." The sound of the servitors filled the silence that followed, mechanical and mindless. When Alaric finally stepped out of the room, Millennium followed. "He's delirious," she said. "Old, starved, half-mad." I can't ignore him," Alaric interrupted. "Not after what he said," she frowned. "You don't actually believe—" "I don't believe in coincidence." They walked in silence through the dim corridors until the command bridge came into view. The Vox relays buzzed softly with static. The scent of ozone and recycled air clung to everything. "Set a course," Alaric ordered. "We're tracing the last planetary records. I want to know who commanded the forces that visited that world." "Astartes?" Malin asked quietly. Alaric looked out the viewport at the endless dark. "If they were, then this is no longer just a salvage run. It's a graveyard." The helmsman hesitated. "Destination, Lord. Wherever the trail leads." As the vigilant Solace turned its prow toward the void, the faint light of the dying world flickered one last time behind them. A reminder that in the Imperium of man, mercy and damnation often wear the same face. The ship's engines roared, and the stars stretched into lines of cold fire. Somewhere, buried in the hum of the warp drive, came the faintest whisper, the echo of a voice that was not his own. "Welcome back, Lord Vane." Warp travel was never silent. It breathed and pulsed through the ship's bones like something alive, a rhythm that crept into every deck, every prayer. The vigilant Solace's hull groaned beneath unseen pressure, its wards shimmering faintly against the unreality beyond. To the uninitiated, it was only noise, the consequence of vast machinery at work. But to those who had traveled long enough between stars, the sound carried words, whispers, memories not their own. Alaric stood alone in the strategium, the faint blue glow of hollow projections casting fractured light across his face. Data streams scrolled before him, reports from Chartist archives, salvaged communiques from long-dead governors, Vox fragments warped by time. All led to the same name. Sarnus, if the records were incomplete, of course. They always were. A colony world at the edge of Segmentum Pacificus, once prosperous under mechanicus oversight. Then came silence. No distress beacon, no evacuation orders, just absence. And now, decades later, a drifting lifeboat with a single survivor. He stared at the planet's grainy image. A dead sphere of ochre and ash orbiting a sun too dim to warm it. Whatever had happened there, it had erased almost everything. Behind him, the door hissed open. Malin entered, her posture straight but her face drawn tight from exhaustion. "The navigator reports turbulence," she said. "Warp eddies near the Mandeville Point. We may need to cut through the upper layers if we want to maintain trajectory." "Do it," Alaric said absently. She hesitated, then stepped closer. "Captain, about that man. The one we found." He didn't look at her. "What about him?" "He's dead. The servitors logged his vitals failing an hour ago. But before that, before the end, he started speaking in low Gothic and something else. Fragmented phrases. I've recorded it." Malin handed him a data slate. The words that flickered across the screen were disjointed, but some lines stood out in sharp relief. "The light will fall. The angels will feed. The Solace will burn." Alaric's fingers tightened around the slate. "Did he say anything else?" "Only one thing, over and over." She swallowed. "He said your name." There was a pause, just long enough for the hum of the ship to seem louder, as though it, too, waited for his reaction. "I see," he said finally. His tone betrayed nothing. Malin shifted uneasily. "Sir, with respect, if the Astartes were involved on Sarnus, we're not equipped for that kind of investigation. Not without authorization, not without support. Authorization?" Alaric's voice was a low whisper. "You think the Inquisition would sanction this?" "Or the Administratum?" If the angels of death purged that world, there's a reason they buried it. No one will speak of it, not the ecclesiarchy, not the mechanicus. Which means we will. He turned to face her, eyes cold. Send a pulse to the auger decks. I want long-range scans for debris fields and shipwrecks. Anything that might have survived orbit. Yes, Captain. As she left, the whispering in the walls seemed to follow her, faint and rhythmic, like the slow beat of a heart beneath metal. Hours passed. The vigilant Solace tore through the warp's endless tides, its shields shimmering as storms clawed against reality's edge. Crew members whispered litanies as they worked, clutching worn charms shaped like the aquila or fragments of bone inscribed with catechisms. Alaric did not sleep. He remembered Sarnas IV, though not as it was. Only flashes, a burned horizon, smoke over shrines, the red silhouettes of armor moving through the haze. He had been there once. He could feel it in his bones, even if the memory refused to take form. He stared into the warp through the viewing lens, a narrow slit lined with gold filigree. The void beyond was a kaleidoscope of screaming light, pulsing like a wounded star. Within it, shapes moved, some vast, some barely human. They watched back. And then, amid that impossible brilliance, he saw it. A symbol, fleeting but unmistakable. The aquila, inverted, wreathed in flame. He stepped back, his breath sharp. The image vanished as quickly as it appeared, swallowed by the swirling madness outside. Captain, a voice came from the comm. It was the helmsman, strained and trembling. Something's off. The Geller field's fluctuating. The machine spirit resists correction. Stabilize it manually. Alaric ordered. I tried. It doesn't respond. It's like static. Then a scream. The Vox cut abruptly. Alaric grabbed his sidearm and strode toward the bridge. The corridors shuddered as alarms blared, red lights flashing against the steel bulkheads. Crewmen ran in silence, trained to suppress panic. When he reached the helm, he saw them, bodies sprawled across the deck, blood pooling in slow motion under the emergency lights. The helmsman lay slumped over the controls, his face pale, eyes wide. But what froze Alaric's breath was not the dead. It was what stood behind them. A shadow, tall and indistinct, its outline flickering like static. For a heartbeat, he thought it wore armor, ancient, ceremonial, and then it was gone. Only the faint scent of ozone remained. The ship groaned again, the sound deeper now, almost like a growl. Navigator, Alaric said through clenched teeth, activating the Vox. Bring us out, now. The warp peeled away in a scream of light and pressure, and then silence. The vigilant Solace shuddered as it broke back into real space, its engines howling from strain. On the viewing screen, a single dead world turned slowly beneath them. Sarnas IV. The world below was not entirely dead, not yet. From orbit, Sarnas IV looked like a scar left upon the galaxy, cracked continents veined with rivers of glass, the atmosphere choked by ash that never settled. Lightning flared beneath the clouds, painting the horizon in sick, violent color. It was the kind of planet the Imperium forgot on purpose. Alaric stood before the viewport, watching the storm bands crawl across its surface. Around him, the bridge had fallen to a hush. Even the servitors seemed subdued, their mechanical murmurs dampened as if the machine spirit itself feared to make noise. Atmospheric analysis? He asked. Mullen's voice came quietly. Toxic, radiation levels spiking across all hemispheres. No life signs detected, though the Auspex is struggling to penetrate the dust layer. He nodded. Deploy survey probes. Begin at the equatorial band. Yes, Captain. The order was given, and for a time only the hum of the engines filled the silence. Alaric leaned against the rail, his gaze fixed on the shifting clouds. There was a feeling he could not name, a pressure behind his eyes, as though the planet itself waited for him to speak first. When the probes returned, their feeds flickered across the display. The surface was a graveyard of metal. Burned hab blocks and shattered spires stretched for kilometers, their skeletal remains casting long shadows in the dim light. One feed zoomed in. A ruined cathedral, its roof collapsed, its walls blackened by fire, and there, carved into the stone above the entrance, faint but unmistakable, the mark of the aquila beneath it. Someone had written a single word in blood and ash, penance. Signal distortion near the ruins, Mullen reported. Localized energy surge. Could be a beacon, but it's erratic. Could also be a malfunctioning generator, or something alive, Alaric said softly. Prepare the landing party. He left the bridge without another word. Down in the launch bay, the air smelled of oil and incense. Crew members moved with silent precision, loading gear and weapons into the waiting shuttle. The Vigilant Solace's emblem, a broken sun, gleamed faintly on their shoulder plates. They did not ask why they were going. They never did. Alaric checked his bolter, then the charge on his power blade. His reflection stared back from the polished steel, pale, lined, and far older than he remembered being. Malin joined him, helmet under her arm, expression unreadable. "Permission to speak freely, Captain?" He nodded. "This feels wrong." "It is wrong," he replied. "But it's ours to do." She hesitated, then sealed her helmet and followed him aboard. The descent was turbulent. The shuttle tore through the atmosphere, buffeted by storms that clawed against its hull. Lightning flashed across the cockpit glass, illuminating a world that seemed to recoil from their presence. When they landed, silence greeted them. Not the silence of peace, but the kind that followed long after the last scream had faded. The ruins loomed like bones, each structure half swallowed by dust. Their boots sank into layers of ash, centuries of decay compressed into brittle earth. The air was heavy, thick with metallic tang and faint whispers of ozone. Alaric's vox crackled with interference. "Stay close," he ordered. "Weapons hot." They moved through the ruins in formation, visors sweeping, auspex scanners humming. The sound of their footsteps echoed endlessly, swallowed by the vast emptiness. Then, movement, a flicker of motion between two collapsed walls. Malin raised her rifle instantly, the red beam of her targeter cutting through the gloom. "Hold," Alaric said. He advanced, boots crunching on glass. What he found there was not an enemy. It was a man, or what remained of one. He was dressed in tattered robes, his flesh paper-thin and pale as wax. Tubes and cables ran from his arms into a crude mechanical harness fused to his spine. A failed servitor, abandoned and half dead, still twitching with broken machine impulses. The creature turned its head toward them. Its lips moved soundlessly, then a voice rasped through the static. "Forgive us." Alaric froze. The servitor's voice was layered, not one voice but many, overlapping, distorted. Human pain and mechanical mimicry entwined. "Forgive us," it said again, louder. Then its chest convulsed, and from within the torn fabric something pulsed, a small sphere of blackened metal, humming faintly with residual energy. "Captain," Malin warned. Alaric stepped forward anyway. "What is that?" The servitor's eyes rolled back. "The angels. They did not bleed. We bled for them." Then the sphere detonated. The explosion was small but vicious, a burst of electromagnetic energy that sent static screaming through the voxnet. The servitor disintegrated in a flash of white light. When the smoke cleared, only dust remained. Malin coughed. "Trap, old Imperial tech. Probably left as a warning." "No," Alaric murmured, scanning the ground. A confession. He knelt where the thing had died. In the ash, faint and deliberate, were letters scorched by heat. A single phrase. "They are not what you think." He stared at the words until the wind erased them. Then his vox crackled again. "Captain," came the voice of a crewman from the shuttle. "You'll want to see this." "We found something beneath the cathedral." Alaric rose slowly. The light had shifted, or maybe the sky had dimmed. Either way, the world seemed heavier now, as if it resented their trespass. He looked once more at the place where the servitor had fallen, then turned toward the ruins ahead. "Lead the way," he said, and as they moved deeper into the shadows of the cathedral, the first faint echoes of chanting reached them, distant, mechanical, and unmistakably human. Inside the ruined cathedral, the air felt wrong. Every breath tasted like rust and old blood, and the echoes that moved through the corridors didn't belong to the living. Alaric and his squad advanced carefully, boots crunching over shattered glass mosaics that once depicted saints and warriors of the Emperor. Now their faces were half burned away, their eyes black holes staring into nothing. "Energy readings are increasing," Malin whispered through the vox. "Something's still running down here." "Then something's maintaining it," Alaric said grimly. They descended a collapsed stairwell into what had once been the catacombs. Flickering lumen strips still glowed along the walls, barely alive but stubborn, like ghosts clinging to their purpose. The deeper they went, the more the air shimmered with heat and static. At the bottom lay a massive iron door, its surface warped and pitted by time. Symbols of the adeptus astartes had been carved into it, not the noble sigils of any known chapter, but twisted versions, the aquila inverted, skulls crowned in thorns, blades pointing downward as if to pierce the earth. "What the hell happened here?" Malin muttered. Alaric touched the door, feeling the faint vibration beneath the metal. Machinery still working, somewhere behind it. "We'll find out soon." With a hiss of hydraulics and the grind of age, the door slowly opened. Beyond it stretched a chamber large enough to house a titan. The walls were lined with stasis pods, hundreds of them. Some shattered, others still humming faintly. Within the intact pods floated forms that made the squad falter. They were human, or had been. Augmentations and surgical scars covered their bodies. Tubes fed into their veins, feeding them nutrients, chemicals, or worse. Each one bore the faded brand of the Imperial Guard, regiments long dead, pressed into some grotesque experiment. One pod still flickered with life. Its occupant twitched weakly, eyes fluttering open as they entered. "By the throne," Malin whispered. "They kept them alive." Alaric approached slowly, his voice steady despite the sickness rising in his throat. "Can you hear me?" The man inside the pod blinked, his gaze unfocused. Are you one of them?" "One of who?" "The angels," he rasped. "The ones who called themselves salvation. They came after the war, said they'd save us, said we'd be reborn." Alaric exchanged a look with Malin. "Which chapter?" The man's lips trembled. "They bore the same mark you do, but theirs bled." Then the pod systems whined and overloaded. Sparks flew, and the man convulsed violently before going still. The readout flatlined. Malin turned away, jaw tight. "They used civilians, soldiers, turned them into what?" "Failed astartes?" "No," Alaric said quietly, scanning the symbols etched along the walls. "Something else." He approached one of the terminals still active. Ancient data flickered across the cracked screen. Medical logs, genetic profiles, dates centuries old. But one word repeated over and over in the margins, handwritten in jagged scrawl: purification. And beneath it, a signature, the mark of a space marine captain. Malin leaned in. "That's your chapter seal." Alaric said nothing for a long moment. The silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the machinery. Finally he whispered, "This world was one of ours." Malin stared. "The vigilant solace. But our records were purged," he finished, "apparently for a reason." As the realization sank in, the low chanting from before grew louder, closer now, echoing through the tunnels. It was rhythmic, mechanical, but unmistakably human. "Movement," Malin warned. Figures emerged from the darkness, dozens of them, wrapped in ragged robes marked with the broken sun of Alaric's chapter. Their faces were pale, their eyes replaced by mechanical lenses, their skin etched with litanies of pain. The leader stepped forward, carrying a staff fashioned from a shattered bolter. His voice was calm, reverent. "You've returned to finish what you began." Alaric raised his weapon. "Identify yourself." "I am what you left behind," the man said. "The last disciple of your mercy." Malin's finger tightened on her trigger. "They're mutants." "Servitors gone rogue." "No," the man said softly. "We are the faithful." "You made us!" The chamber trembled as the old generators above roared to life. Lights flickered and the symbols on the walls began to glow faintly red, blood patterns burning through the dust. "Captain," Malin said through gritted teeth. "Orders?" Alaric hesitated. His bolter felt suddenly heavy. The robed man took a step closer. "When your brothers left, they said humanity was too weak to endure. So they reforged us, made us better, purer. But the Emperor never spoke again. So we kept waiting. And when no angels came, we learned to pray in the dark." He raised his hand, revealing a brand seared into his palm, the same symbol that adorned Alaric's own armor. "We are your legacy." A horrible quiet filled the room. Malin's voice cracked over the vox. "They're heretics, Captain." "Say the word." Alaric looked at them, the twisted remnants of his chapter's forgotten sins, and felt something close to pity. Then, quietly, he said, "No survivors." The chamber erupted in gunfire. Bolter rounds tore through the air, thunder echoing in the depths. The chanting turned to screams. Red light painted the walls as the last descendants of Sarnus IV fell, one by one, under the weight of imperial absolution. When it was over, only silence remained. Smoke drifted lazily through the air, settling over the dead like dust returning home. Malin removed her helmet, face pale. "Sir, was that necessary?" "Yes," Alaric said, voice low. "Because if it wasn't, then everything we are is a lie." He turned back to the pods, to the faint hum of the machinery still struggling to function. For a moment he thought he heard the dying words of the servitor echo again. "Forgive us." But he didn't answer. He only whispered, "There's nothing left to forgive." And as the squad began to withdraw, deep within the ruins, one final pod flickered to life, its occupant stirring, its eyes opening slowly, reflecting the faint red glow of the broken sun. The storm returned before they reached orbit. From the bridge of the vigilant Solace, Alaric watched it unfold, a maelstrom of lightning and ash clouds swallowing the planet below. The sky seemed to boil, churning as if the world itself was trying to erase what had been uncovered. Malane stood beside him, helmet under her arm, face drawn. "The surface readings are unstable. That entire region will be gone within the hour." "Good," Alaric murmured. "Let it burn." Yet even as he said it, his reflection in the viewport wavered, not from the storm, but from the unease gnawing at the back of his mind. The ruins on Sarnus IV had been centuries old. Those experiments, that symbol, none of it should have survived. And yet it had, preserved by purpose, by faith. He turned toward the central command dais where the ship's astropath Vera sat in her throne of gold and wire. Her eyes were milk white, her mouth moving in slow, soundless prayer. "Can you raise the beacon?" he asked. Her head twitched, as if something cold passed through her. "The Astronomicon burns dim beyond this sector, Lord Captain. The Emperor's light falters here. I can feel echoes." "Echoes?" She nodded slightly. Voices carried on the void. "Some are human, some remember being so." The bridge fell quiet. Malin's gaze flicked between them. "We're not staying to find out what they are, right?" Alaric didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned toward the tactical holomap projected before him, the faint outline of the subsector, a scattering of unmarked worlds and ancient signals. One of them pulsed faintly red, linked to an old imperial data string. "This one," he said. "Cross-reference with our logs." The servitor clattered at its console, emitting bursts of static. After a moment, it replied, "Designation, Watch Station Eris, abandoned. Last transmission recorded 972 standard years ago. Same period as the Sarnus IV purge." Malin muttered. "Set course," Alaric ordered. Malin frowned. "Captain, we just fought ghosts. Do you really want to chase their shadows?" "Whatever happened on that planet started somewhere," he said. "And I want to know where." The engines rumbled, shaking the deck as the ship began its slow turn toward the black. Vera's voice cut through the noise, soft and trembling. "Something watches us from the storm." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Alaric turned back to the viewport, to the seething clouds below, and for a moment, he thought he saw a shape moving within them. Vast, winged, impossible. Then it was gone. Hours later, when the vigilant Solace broke free of the planet's gravity well, the void outside was unnaturally still. No stars, no drift, just darkness. Vera convulsed suddenly, her hands gripping the arms of her throne. "It's not the void," she gasped. "It's a wound." "Explain," Alaric demanded. She turned toward him, blind eyes wide and wet with blood. "Something tore through reality here long ago. It never healed," Malin swore under her breath. "Warp storm?" "No," Vera whispered. "A scar left by faith." The words sent a chill through the command deck. Alaric stepped closer. "How far to Watch Station Eris?" 5 hours at half burn. "Maintain heading," he said, "and lock all decks to alert status. Whatever's in that darkness, we're not turning back." The lights dimmed to crimson as the ship entered silent running. Crewmen moved like shadows between consoles, their faces drawn and pale. The air felt colder, heavy with the static tang of ozone. In the quiet, Alaric opened his private Vox channel. "Archivist," he said. A mechanical voice replied instantly. The ship's servitor librarian, its once human brain entombed within layers of steel and wire. "Acknowledged, Lord Captain. Search our records for the phrase Purification Project. Cross-reference with my chapter archives. Processing. Minutes passed. The hum of the engines filled the silence. Then, result located. Partial file. Restricted designation. Vigilant Genesis. Alaric's pulse quickened. Open it. Access denied. Genetic encryption required. By whose authority? Yours. He froze. For a moment, he could hear nothing but the faint echo of his own breathing. Override protocol, he said. Code vein Primera 7. The servitor paused, gears whirring. Then a flicker of static filled the channel, and a single fragmented image appeared on the command display. A figure in astartes armor, helm removed, face half-shadowed. It was Alaric, or someone who looked like him. The recording crackled, voice distorted but unmistakable. If you're hearing this, then the cycle failed. The purification was incomplete. The human strain remains impure. You must finish what we began. Then the image dissolved into static. Millennium stared at him, disbelief written across her face. That's impossible. Apparently not, Alaric said, though his voice trembled. Get me that watch station, now. The ship surged forward, engines flaring against the black. Behind them, unseen, the storm on Sarnis IV began to rise again, twisting upward, following their trail like something that refused to be left behind. The corridors of the Vigilant Solace had begun to sound different. The hum of its plasma conduits once sang in harmony with the heartbeats of its crew, steady, mechanical, predictable. Now there was a dissonance to it, a faint distortion that made every step feel uncertain, as though the ship itself was holding its breath. The light panels flickered not from decay but hesitation. Pausing between moments of clarity and something else entirely, Alaric Vane walked alone through the upper deck, his boots echoing against the deck plates like a judge's gavel. The air smelled faintly of burnt oil and old incense, the kind once used by the ecclesiarchy to bless their dead. The ship's spirit, its ancient, half-mad machine consciousness, had begun to whisper in the walls again. Fragmented prayers in binary cant that bled through the vox like the murmur of a dying god. He didn't remember when sleep had last come easily. When he did manage to drift into unconsciousness, he woke with the taste of copper on his tongue and visions of figures walking the halls, not crewmen, not servitors, but something translucent, watching him from the corners of perception. The navigator claimed the warp currents were growing thin around them, that reality itself was weakening. But Alaric knew better. It wasn't the warp pressing in. It was something within the ship pressing out. The watch station Eris loomed in the void ahead, suspended like a corpse impaled upon starlight. No vox signal, no beacon, only the faintest energy readings emanating from its broken heart. It had once been an imperial listening post, a place where explorator fleets and rogue traders left coded transmissions before vanishing into uncharted sectors. Now it was just another relic, forgotten, silent, patient. When the Vigilant Solace drew close enough for docking procedures, the station's ancient augurs reacted on their own, as though remembering a duty long neglected. The docking clamps extended with a slow, agonized groan. Alaric stood on the bridge, eyes fixed on the screen, watching as the automated systems aligned themselves perfectly, too perfectly. No human hands should have been able to maintain such precision after centuries of neglect. Seal all Vox channels, he ordered, his voice hoarse but steady. No contact until I say otherwise. The crew obeyed, but not without fear. Even among the hardened veterans and the faithless, there was a superstition about dead stations, the idea that they listened, that they remembered. When the docking bay doors opened, a rush of stale air flooded into the ship, carrying with it a faint rhythmic sound. It wasn't static. It wasn't machinery. It was breathing. Alaric descended first, his carapace armor glinting under the weak lumen strips. The corridors of Eris were choked with dust, the walls covered in layers of wax-sealed prayers. Most had long since yellowed and cracked, their inked blessings worn away by time. He passed a mural depicting the Emperor as a blazing sun, his light cast upon kneeling warriors. But the faces of the faithful had been scratched out, their eyes gouged into pits of darkness. A tech adept followed behind him, holding a sputtering lumen. Readings are erratic, Lord Captain, the adept muttered. Power sources are active, but shifting, as if the energy is moving through the walls. Alaric turned his gaze toward a nearby console, half melted from age and radiation. When he touched its surface, a spark leapt out, biting into his glove. The console flared to life for a heartbeat, enough to display a single fragment of text in green lettering across the screen. Incoming message. Priority. Heraldic. Then, just as quickly, it died. Who sent that? Alaric asked. The adept stared at the dead screen. There is no record of origin, and from somewhere deep within the station, a voice whispered his name. It was not human, not mechanical. It was the sound of a memory-given breath. The sound came again, softer this time, as though the station itself was practicing the shape of his name, tasting it before speaking it aloud. Alaric froze, his hand hovering above his plasma pistol, eyes sweeping the corridor. The lumen carried by the tech adept flickered, stuttered, and then died entirely. In that moment of darkness, Alaric could hear the walls breathing, not an illusion, but a slow, wet rhythm, like lungs filled with fluid. He activated his suit's shoulder light, casting a pale blue beam down the hall. Dust motes floated in the air like drifting spores. The sigils carved into the metal walls began to move, not by mechanical motion, but by trick of perception, bending like flesh. For a moment he thought he saw a face pressed beneath the surface of the steel, its mouth open in a silent scream. Then it was gone. They pressed deeper into Watch Station Eris. The corridors narrowed, forcing them to move single file. Each footstep echoed too loudly, as though the space were swallowing sound and regurgitating it seconds later. When they passed a shrine dedicated to the Emperor, Alaric felt his throat tighten. The statue's face had been removed, replaced with a mirror of polished brass. And within its reflection, he saw not himself, but a figure standing behind him, taller, broader, wearing the faded insignia of a rogue trader's crest. He spun, weapon raised. Nothing. The adept's voice trembled. My lord, this place is reactive. It knows us. Alaric turned to face him, his expression a mask of calm he did not feel. Keep moving. The data vault is near the central spire. Once we retrieve the records, we're done here. But deep within himself, Alaric knew that wasn't true. The ship's machine spirit had marked this place as dangerous long before they docked. He had ignored its warnings, just as he had ignored the quiet, mutinous prayers whispered among his officers. That was his curse as a rogue trader, to believe he could command the uncommandable, to chart the unchartable, to own what could never belong to any man. The central spire was a wound torn through the heart of the station. Machinery jutted from the floor like exposed bone, and in the center stood a throne made of vox wires and saint effigies welded together in blasphemous geometry. A figure sat upon it, or what was left of one. Desiccated flesh clung to armor once resplendent with the sigils of the Imperial Navy. The corpse's mouth was open in a permanent scream, its eyes replaced with flickering data nodes. Alaric approached slowly. The air was heavy, thick with the metallic tang of ozone. When he leaned closer, the corpse moved. Its jaw twitched. A crackle of sound hissed from the vox nodes embedded in its skull. Vain. The adept dropped his lumen and stumbled backward, whispering a prayer in Binharic static. You came back, the corpse said. I've never been here, Alaric replied quietly. The vox crackled again, the voice shifting into multiple tones, overlapping. Man, woman, machine, echoing all at once. You left us here. You promised return. The light died. The Emperor turned his gaze away. We waited. Alaric's heartbeat thundered in his ears. He stepped closer, gripping the corpse's collar. Who are you? The voice bled through the vox grill like oil. I am your shadow, Alaric Vane. The part of you left behind every time you traded mercy for gain. I am the cost of your freedom. The corpse's mouth opened wider, splitting the flesh down to the bone. From within, a small metal device tumbled out, a data slate bearing the seal of his own dynasty. Fresh, unaged, impossible. The adept picked it up with trembling hands. My lord, this is dated 4 months from now. Alaric stared at the corpse, its dead hand still clutching the armrest of its throne. Behind it, the walls began to pulse, the sigils bleeding light. Eris was not a dead station. It was a memory, a reflection of something still coming, and somewhere, faintly through the vox, came the sound of the Vigilant Solace screaming. The Vigilant Solace loomed in orbit like a wounded animal, its prow lights cutting through the void with feverish, uneven pulses. As the boarding shuttle latched against the airlock, Alaric could feel the static crawl along his skin beneath his carapace armor. The return should have been a relief, the cold sterility of his ship, the iron discipline of its crew. But something had shifted. The hull seemed to hum with an alien cadence, a whisper that lingered just beneath the threshold of comprehension. When the airlock cycled open, a rush of stale metallic air struck him. The corridors beyond were dim, their lumen strips flickering like dying stars. The servitors that lined the maintenance bays stood motionless, their mechanical limbs twitching as though caught mid-command. The smell of oil and incense filled the air, but beneath it was something new, a scent like burnt copper and decay, faint yet unmistakable. The ship's chief engineer, Magos Vethrix, awaited him at the threshold, his red robes heavy with dust. The lenses of his optical implants whirred and adjusted, struggling to focus. "Lord Captain," he said, his voice filtered through static. "The machine spirit is agitated. We have detected anomalies across multiple decks. Systems report intrusion events, but no corresponding entities." Alaric brushed past him, the echo of his boots sharp against the decking. "Define intrusion," Vethrix hesitated. "Self-initiated processes, locked doors opening without access codes, Vox signals that repeat crew voices, hours after the individuals have ceased transmission. The ship believes it is being invaded, but by what? It cannot say." They made their way toward the Strategium. Each junction they passed bore signs of unease. Offerings hastily scrawled by fearful crew, scraps of parchment inked with the imperial aquila, prayers pinned beside malfunctioning panels. The echoes of distant chanting could be heard. The deck priests, perhaps, trying to soothe the spirit of the ship with ancient litanies. But their prayers sounded fractured, as though whispered to someone who no longer listened. When Alaric entered the Strategium, the hololith displays flickered to life on their own. The ship's layout shimmered in ghostly blue, veins of light pulsing through it like arteries. At first glance, the display showed a familiar outline, but as Alaric watched, the corridors began to shift, bending, lengthening, rearranging themselves. The image distorted into something unrecognizable. "The data core is infected," said Vethrix. "I have purged the machine right 7 times, but the spirit resists. It recognizes new architecture, patterns I cannot trace to imperial design." The rogue trader studied the image, eyes narrowing. "Show me the source." The Magos adjusted a dial. A single pulsing node appeared at the heart of the ship, the vault where the newly retrieved data slate had been secured. Alaric's throat tightened. He turned toward the adept who had accompanied him to Eris, but the man was gone. A faint smear of oil marked the deck where he had stood. "Seal the vault," Alaric said. "Now." Vethrix hesitated. "Lord Captain, the spirit refuses." The hololith flared white. A scream tore through the Vox systems. Not mechanical, not human, but something that seemed to carry meaning. Not a word, but the impression of one. Recognition. The lights across the Strategium dimmed, replaced by a dull crimson glow. In the static of the Vox, a voice emerged. "You can't shut it out, Alaric. You brought it home." It was his own voice. The crew froze. Vethrix turned toward him, mechanical limbs trembling, his lenses flickering like candles in the wind. "My lord, the voice print matches your own, down to the neural pattern." Alaric felt the blood drain from his face. He stepped forward and muted the Vox manually. "That isn't me," he said. But even as he spoke, the command consoles began to activate. One by one, the ship's subsystems came online. Engines, void shields, weapons arrays, all without human input. The vessel was waking up, not in obedience, but in rebellion. "Shut it down." Alaric roared. Vethrix moved to comply, but his mechadendrites locked mid-motion, as though seized by invisible force. A blinding surge of energy erupted from the control nexus, throwing the Magos across the deck. His metal limbs sparked as he struck the wall, his Vox grill stuttering with broken prayers. Alaric drew his pistol and fired into the console, but the display did not die. It shimmered, twisted, and for an instant, the Vigilant Solace's blueprint became the outline of a face. The same face he had seen on Eris, pressed beneath the metal of the walls. A whisper cut through the static. "The shadow remembers." Alaric staggered back, breathing hard. Around him, the ship's lights pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat, as if the Vigilant Solace was sinking itself to his flesh. Vethrix crawled to his feet, one eye lens shattered, his voice a hiss of static. "My lord, the ship is becoming you." The rogue trader said nothing. For the first time since Eris, he felt something colder than fear. The creeping realization that his freedom, his legacy, his empire among the stars, had never truly been his own. It had always been the curse carried within him. The curse was awake. The stars had ceased to move. Or perhaps, Alaric thought, they had never moved at all. The vigilant solace drifted through a stretch of void so vast and silent that the Auspex readings returned nothing. Not dust, not radiation, not even the whisper of cosmic background hum. The ship floated in an absence so perfect it made the human mind ache. Even the crew had begun to speak in whispers, as though their voices might awaken something sleeping just beyond the hull. And yet, something had awakened. It began with the lights. They no longer flickered in the familiar rhythm of machine spirit fatigue. Instead, they pulsed, slowly, deliberately, in time with something distant and immeasurable. The vox chant of the tech priests faltered, their canticles trailing off mid-syllable as they turned toward the walls, hearing within them the low murmur of what sounded like a heartbeat the size of a sun. Alaric walked the corridors, his footsteps echoing against the metal like drops of rain in a tomb. The air was dry, acrid. It carried the faint, electric tang of ozone and the more disturbing scent of something organic. He passed a shrine to the Emperor that had blackened at the edges, its candles burning cold blue instead of gold. The aquila above it had begun to peel away from the wall, as if rejecting the surface it had once sanctified. He found his quartermaster, Joral, in the lower deck. The man was sitting cross-legged before a flickering lumen, staring into nothing. His lips moved, a mutter, soft, desperate. Alaric caught the words and felt a coldness in his gut. "They see us now, Lord Captain." "They see us from the other side." Alaric demanded an explanation, but Joral only laughed, a brittle, cracked sound that ended in a sob. "There's no warp, not here. Just what's left when the warp stops watching, the dark that came before the gods." That night, though there was no night, only the same sickly half-light, Alaric dreamed. Or thought he did. He stood upon a sea of glass with stars beneath his feet instead of above. Shapes moved in that reflection, not human, not Xenos, something older like the forgotten idea of fear given form. They whispered his name in a language he almost recognized, though it was made of memories, not words. When he awoke, his cabin walls were damp with condensation, or perhaps it was breath. The ship's engines still thrummed, but now their rhythm felt wrong, uneven, like a dying heart struggling to remember how to beat. And beneath that sound was another, a frequency so low it could only be felt through bone, not heard. He convened the bridge crew, demanding status updates. Every data slate displayed corrupted symbols, spirals of script not from any imperial code. The navigator, her third eye tightly bandaged, sat trembling. "We've left the Emperor's light," she whispered. "There's no astronomicon, no warp tide, only a hole where the galaxy should be." For the first time, Alaric saw genuine fear in a space marine's eyes, not for death, but for meaninglessness. The void was not empty. It was hungry, and when the ship's Auspex finally did return a signal, it was not from ahead, but from inside. A second vessel, vast and dead, moving within their own shadow. The vigilant solace had met itself in the dark, its own echo, its own ghost. The sky over the world ship was no longer a sky. It was a shivering membrane of pale light, trembling as if beneath the weight of something immense pressing from beyond. Each pulse of it sent a whisper through the vox relays, like a voice trying to speak through water. Some said it was the Emperor's will, warning them to turn away. Others said it was something older, something the Imperium had buried and forgotten. Cassian watched from the medici deck as the first of the wounded began to convulse. The augurs couldn't read their vitals anymore. Their implants flickered, displaying only fragments of data. Heartbeats stretched into long metallic shrieks. Medici serfs worked until their fingers bled, and still the bodies trembled like strings of broken code. He knew the signs. Warp sickness, not the kind brought by distance, but by proximity. Something massive, something sentient was near. The apothecary had ordered the lower decks sealed. The humans who served as porters, cooks, and cleaning thralls had been confined to storage compartments. Containment, they called it, but Cassian knew better. It was extermination by another name. The air began to stink of promethium, and even the wounded started whispering prayers that sounded more like confessions. Cassian remembered one boy, a servitor half-built, its mind not yet erased, murmuring the same phrase again and again before its chest split open in seizure. He is not alone on the throne. He is not alone. When the apothecary found him watching, he said nothing, just placed a hand on Cassian's shoulder and left a faint smear of blood there, not from a wound, from his work. From the dozens of bodies that would never be buried, only recycled. The ship began to shudder. Not from impact, but from breathing. The hull exhaled and the lights flickered like eyelids. Cassian gripped the railing and looked into the medici ward, rows of wounded, motionless now, their chests sinking in unison like waves retreating from a shore. A voice on the vox cut through. Contact. Unknown signature. Warp bleed increasing. And then, silence. In that silence, Cassian heard something impossible. The sound of a heartbeat that was not his own, not human, not mechanical. Something vast, slow, and patient. He turned to look at the apothecary. The Marine's eyes were bright under the helm lenses, reflecting the dying lights of the ward. For a moment, Cassian thought he saw fear there. "Seal the decks," the apothecary said again, but softer this time, almost like a prayer. And then the ship began to scream, not from metal, from within. The scream rippled through the decks, vibrating through bulkheads and into the bone. It was not mechanical, nor could it be mapped by any auspex. It was alive. It had tone, rhythm, almost language. Cassian fell to his knees, pressing his palms over his ears, but it was useless. The sound came from inside. The Medicaid deck fell into chaos. Servo arms spasmed. The dead twitched as if trying to rise. A dozen wounded began to chant in unison, their mouths forming words that were older than Low Gothic. Cassian backed away as the air thickened, and the lumen strips bled out one by one. In that blackness, the apothecary stood unmoving, only his armor's pauldrons catching the dying glow. Then came the smell, copper and incense mingled with ozone. Something like the air before lightning, but wrong. It had weight. It pressed against the lungs. The apothecary finally moved, activating the emergency purge seals. Steel slabs descended with a hiss, cutting off sections of the ship like severed limbs. "We cannot let it spread," he said through his vox grill, though Cassian wasn't sure if he meant the sound or the sickness. Cassian stumbled toward him. "They're still alive." "You're trapping them!" The Marine turned sharply, helm lenses glaring like twin suns. "No, Medici. You're thinking like a man. Think like the Imperium." That silenced him, because he knew what that meant. The Imperium did not save the wounded. It quarantined them. It did not heal the sick. It sanctified their remains. The apothecary raised his bolt pistol and, with grim precision, began to administer what he called mercy. Each shot was slow, measured, reverent. Cassian wanted to look away, but something inside him, some awful curiosity, made him watch every round find its mark. The last of the wounded opened her eyes just before the end. She smiled at him, whispering through blood. "The throne is cracking," she said, "and something is crawling out." Then the gunfire ended. The apothecary turned, helm lenses dimming, and motioned for Cassian to follow. Together they stepped into the lift that led to the ship's upper decks, the bridge where the truth waited. As the doors sealed, Cassian realized he could still hear the heartbeat. Slower now, closer. When the lift doors opened, the world above was wrong. The bridge was silent. The command crew still sat in their stations, but their flesh had crystallized, frozen mid-motion. Their eyes were glass marbles of black resin, their mouths stretched in silent prayer. A faint shimmer in the air bent the light around them, like heat above sand. And at its center, something watched. It had no form, no color. Just the impression of presence, an outline where reality refused to sit still. Cassian felt his mind slide against it like water on glass. The apothecary raised his weapon, but the thing did not move. It simply was, and then it spoke, not through sound, but through memory. Cassian saw visions, bleeding through his mind like cracks in stained glass. 1,000 ships adrift in the void, their crews praying to corpses, worlds burning in worship. The Emperor's eyes opening for the first time in 10,000 years, not in mercy, but in hunger. He fell to the floor, gasping, the vision retreating as suddenly as it had come. When he looked up, the presence was gone. The apothecary was on one knee, helm cracked, blood leaking through the vox grill. Cassian whispered, trembling, "What did you see?" The apothecary didn't answer for a long time. Then, in a voice like groundstone, he said, "Nothing we weren't meant to." Outside the viewport, the stars had vanished. Only the warp remained. Cassian didn't remember how long he stood before the viewport. Time in the warp had no rhythm, no pulse. The stars were gone, replaced by a bruised sky that pulsed like a living wound. Colors bled into one another, violet into crimson, gold into black, all moving with the slow breath of something vast and dreaming. The ship moaned, its hull flexing as if it too had begun to feel. The apothecary had sealed the bridge, activating wards engraved with fragments of the imperial creed. He worked in silence, etching sigils into steel with his combat knife, whispering what might have been prayers or oaths. His voice was low, deliberate, and terribly calm, the calm of a man who had seen too much to still believe in safety. Cassian sat slumped near the Vox console, staring at the lifeless crew. He thought he could hear them whisper sometimes, their glassy mouths twitching ever so slightly when the ship shuddered. Perhaps it was the echo of the warp pressing through the walls, or perhaps something had begun to use them as mouths. He tried to recall the names of the dead, as if remembering them would keep them human. But the words slipped away, replaced by a different name, one he didn't know, but that kept crawling through his thoughts like a parasite. Ereshkigal. He didn't know its meaning, only that each time he thought it, the lights dimmed, and the apothecary's head turned sharply as though hearing it too. "We do not speak what listens back," the Marine said at last. His voice rough through the damaged Vox grill. Cassian nodded, trembling. He didn't remember saying the name aloud. The apothecary continued carving symbols into the deck, his armor plates marked with scripture and burn scars. "The warp feeds on memory," he said. "It devours what you love and gives back only reflection. Do not trust what speaks in familiar tones. Do not look when it shows you mercy." Cassian stared at the mechanicus surgical tools still scattered across the floor. One of them was vibrating, though no power ran through it. He picked it up, a simple bone saw, and saw that its teeth were wet. He hadn't noticed it before. The blood was fresh. He dropped it, backing away. "Apothecary." "There's blood on." The Marine didn't answer. His helmet lenses had gone dark again. He stood perfectly still, gauntleted hands gripping his knife, motionless as a statue. Cassian took a step closer. The faint hum of the ship deepened, becoming almost a heartbeat again. When the apothecary finally spoke, it wasn't with his own voice. "You are far from the throne," it whispered. Cassian stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. The Marine's body convulsed, armor plates grinding as something moved beneath them, like hands pressing from the inside. His Vox grill crackled, switching between languages Cassian didn't recognize, and then, for a single moment, it spoke as his mother. "Do you remember the gardens of Calth?" Cassian froze. He hadn't been to Calth. He had never known a garden. The thing behind the voice laughed softly, not cruelly but gently, like a parent humoring a child. "Then whose memories do you dream?" The viewport flared white. For a second he thought he saw the shape of a world beyond the warp's veil, a pale planet, scarred and radiant, its surface covered in moving lights. And in the blackness between those lights, something stirred. Not a god, not a demon, something older, quieter, and infinitely patient. Cassian screamed, but no sound left his throat. When he could see again, the apothecary was gone. Only his helm remained, lying at Cassian's feet. Inside it, the Vox still crackled softly, and a voice spoke again. "Mechanicus Cassian," it said, perfectly calm. "Report to the lower decks. The wounded await you." He stared at the helm for a long time, unable to move. He could feel it now. The pulse beneath the floor, the breath behind the walls, the ship itself whispering in rhythm with the name he could not forget. Ereshkigal. He didn't know if it was a curse or a calling, but he knew he was going to answer. The corridors below the Mechanicus deck were almost entirely dark, lit only by the rhythmic flash of failing lumen strips. Cassian's boots clanged softly against the metal floor as he descended, guided by the faint hum of the Vox still echoing from the apothecary's helm strapped to his belt. The voice within it spoke every few minutes, always the same words. "The wounded await you, But now, sometimes, it whispered other things. Fragments of prayers, coordinates, the distant sounds of breathing. He passed the first containment bulkhead. It was open, torn apart from the inside. The deck beyond smelled of burned metal and rot. The wounded soldiers, dozens of them, were still where they had been left, yet none of them looked alive. Their bodies were rigid, faces turned upward, eyes wide. Each had a mark carved into their foreheads, a rough spiral etched deep enough to scar bone. Cassian recognized it. The apothecary had carved the same sigil into the deck above. He tried to close their eyes, whispering the litany of passing, but their lids would not move. Their skin felt like dried parchment, brittle and empty. As he turned away, something in the dark whispered his name. Not aloud, but inside his skull, perfectly clear, as though it had always known how to speak it. Cassian. He froze. The air seemed to thicken. Then came the soft, deliberate sound of footsteps approaching from behind. He spun, raising his lamp pack, but the corridor was empty. A faint glow flickered at the far end, pale, shifting light like reflection on water. As he moved closer, he saw that it wasn't light at all. It was flesh. The walls were growing. Veins pulsed beneath the steel, beating in rhythm with the hum of the ship. And in the center of the corridor, half merged into the bulkhead, was a man, or what had once been one. His uniform was still intact, a medici badge glinting weakly under the lamp, but his torso had been absorbed into the wall. Only his head and shoulders remained free, eyes wide and mouth trembling. "Help me," he whispered, his lips barely able to move. "It's learning us." Cassian knelt beside him, reaching for his kit, but the man convulsed violently. His chest opened like a wound, and from within spilled a river of black liquid that hissed as it hit the ground. The fluid moved on its own, flowing toward Cassian's boots. He stepped back, heart pounding. The man's eyes rolled upward. "You're in its dream now." And then he stopped breathing. Cassian stumbled back, gripping the wall. The flesh beneath his hand was warm. It pulsed. And somewhere deep within the ship, something answered. The vox crackled again. "Medici Cassian, the wounded await you." The voice was no longer calm. It was impatient. He ran, down past the cargo holds, past the gutted manufactorum bays, until he reached the lowest decks, where the ship's gravity began to fail. There, bodies floated like broken saints in orbit around shattered machinery. Some were missing limbs, others entire faces, but all of them shared the same mark carved into their flesh. The spiral. He drifted through them, trying not to look into their hollow eyes. The vox spoke once more, louder now, closer. "You must finish what we began." The light of his lamp flickered out. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then, a breath. A sound not made by lungs or mouth, but by the entire ship. And in that dark, he saw movement. At first, he thought it was one of the wounded stirring. But then he realized the truth. The bodies were moving together, merging, their limbs folding into one another, bones cracking, skin tearing, forming something massive and slow. It reached toward him, not to kill but to touch. Cassian could feel it inside his mind now. Not words, not thoughts, but memories. It was showing him things. Planets burning under golden banners, the Emperor's face carved into worlds. Billions of humans praying, not to be saved, but to be seen. And then he understood. The wounded weren't calling for help. They were becoming part of something that listened back. He screamed and fired his last pistol blindly, but the shots disappeared into the air as though swallowed. The creature's shape, if it could be called that, began to shift again, a mass of faces forming from the bodies it had taken. Every one of them spoke in the same voice, the apothecary's voice. "Do not be afraid, Cassian. We are closer to the throne than ever." He tried to run, but the floor beneath him turned to liquid. Hands rose from it, pulling him down, not violently, gently, as if welcoming him home. The last thing he saw, before the blackness claimed him, was the spiral sigil glowing faintly on the wall. And he finally understood what it was. It wasn't a mark of corruption. It was an invitation. Cassian awoke in silence. Not the silence of space, but something deeper. A silence that watched. His body felt weightless, his thoughts scattered like dust motes drifting in slow orbit. When he opened his eyes, he was no longer in the medici ward. There was no ship, no light, no sound of machinery, only a vast gray expanse stretching in every direction, its surface rippling as though made of thin mist. He tried to move, and the ground responded, folding softly under his touch like flesh remembering its shape. His wounds were gone, but his skin bore faint patterns, spirals, endless and overlapping, like echoes of that same mark carved into the others. He should have been afraid, but he wasn't. The fear had burned out somewhere between pain and awe. In its place was only a hollow clarity, the kind that comes just before truth. And then, far ahead, something began to rise from the mist. A figure, immense and formless, shifting between human and machine. One moment it was clad in armor like an astartes. The next, it was a burning outline, faceless, radiant, impossible to look upon directly. Cassian tried to speak, but his voice dissolved before it reached the air. Still the thing answered. "You have seen what lies between man and his god," it said, though its mouth never moved. "Now you understand the price of survival." The air around them quivered with distant sound, not noise but a memory. The echo of ships burning, of prayers whispered in empty halls, of names erased from records to keep the illusion of order. Cassian bowed his head. "Are you the Emperor?" The figure flickered, light bleeding through its silhouette. "I am not him. I am the wound he left behind." Something inside Cassian cracked at those words. He wanted to deny it, to scream that the Emperor lived, that the Astronomicon still burned. But even now he could feel the truth like a sickness in the marrow of his bones. The light that guided them was not a flame. It was a scar. The mist shifted again. He saw flashes, memories, or perhaps dreams. The apothecary carving the sigil, the wounded fusing into one another, the ship's hull turning to living flesh. All of it was not corruption, but communication. Humanity reaching towards something divine, reshaping itself in desperation to be heard. "You made them suffer," Cassian whispered. "To send a message?" The figure's form stilled. They wanted to be closer, to the throne, to the source of his pain. The mist trembled violently now, and for a moment Cassian felt it. The pulse that ran through all things human. Billions of souls crying out, begging not for mercy but for purpose. Every prayer a spark in the dark, and somewhere beyond, something vast stirring in answer. The figure turned its gaze upon him, and though it had no eyes, he felt it pierce through every layer of his mind. "Do you still wish to heal the wounded, Medicae?" He hesitated. "Yes." "Then understand if there is no healing, only transformation." The ground beneath him began to rise, folding upward like a living wave. Hands reached out from within it, human, mechanical, spectral, pulling him upward. He tried to fight, but every motion only drew him deeper into the current of bodies, of memories, of thoughts. The apothecary's voice returned, whispering through the fog. "He is not alone on the throne." "None of us are," Cassian screamed, but the sound became prayer. The light above grew brighter until it devoured everything, the mist, the figure, the echoes of war and suffering, and for one brief moment, he felt it, the Emperor's presence. Not the golden radiance sung by the ecclesiarchy, not the serene visage carved into cathedral glass, but the raw, unbearable consciousness of a god chained to a throne, still fighting, still bleeding light into the void. He saw the faces of every wounded soul he had ever treated reflected in that radiance, their pain feeding it, their devotion holding it steady. The realization tore through him. The Imperium itself was the wound, and humanity its infection and cure all at once. The Emperor did not reign over them. He endured for them, and in that endurance he consumed everything they were. Cassian's vision burned white. His final thought before the light swallowed him was neither despair nor hope, but an understanding that made both meaningless. There were no gods in the Imperium, only the endless echo of men trying to become them. When the light receded, there was only the sound of breathing. Not his own, but many. Cassian opened his eyes and found himself lying on a cold slab of metal. The medici ward again, or something pretending to be it. The lights flickered a pale gold, and the scent of incense hung in the air, too thick, too sweet. His armor was gone. His hands, bare, trembling, were marked with the same spirals he had seen in the others. "Brother Cassian." The voice came from the corner, calm and cold. The apothecary stepped forward, though now his form was strange. Armor fused with veins of black glass, his face hidden behind a helm that seemed to weep oil. "You survived the communion." Cassian tried to speak, but his throat felt raw, as if something had clawed its way out. What have you done?" The apothecary regarded him for a long moment, then gestured to the ceiling. Through the cracks in the ship's metal hide, Cassian could see the stars, no longer cold, distant points of light but eyes infinite and unblinking. Watching back, "We did what we always do," the apothecary said. "We served." Cassian's pulse thundered. The medici ward shifted again. The wounded lined the walls, silent now, their bodies pale as wax. Yet they were not dead. Their chests rose and fell in unison, breathing not air but rhythm. A slow, sacred pulse that matched the throb of the ship's engine, or perhaps its heart. One of them turned his head toward Cassian, eyes black and shining. "Do you see now?" he whispered. "The Emperor does not hear prayers. He remembers them. Through us." Cassian staggered backward, but there was nowhere to go. The door behind him had fused shut, metal bleeding into bone. He could feel the same pulse inside himself now, faint but growing. A second heartbeat, deeper and slower, echoing the rhythm around him. "I don't want this," he gasped. The apothecary tilted his head. "You already chose it when you refused to let them die. You believed you could save them, but in the Imperium, mercy and damnation wear the same face." Cassian fell to his knees, shaking. The air shimmered, and through the haze he saw the Emperor again. Not the blazing god form, but something smaller, more human. A dying man upon a throne of agony, his veins alight with the screams of 1,000,000,000,000 souls. Cassian whispered, "Why do you keep us alive?" The vision smiled, a hollow, infinite smile. "Because without pain, there would be no faith." The words sank into him like blades. He tried to reject them, to rise, but his body was no longer his own. The spirals on his skin began to glow, threads of faint gold weaving together, binding him to the pulse. His mind filled with whispers, the voices of the wounded, the apothecary, the billions who prayed in blind devotion every day, and beneath it all, a deeper voice, ancient, weary, unending, endure. Cassian gasped as the transformation overtook him. His flesh hardened, his breath slowed, his thoughts became static, an echo. He felt the ship's systems reaching for him, connecting, rewriting. He was becoming part of it, the next layer of the Imperium's silent machinery, another soul soldered into the architecture of survival. The apothecary watched, expression unreadable. "You will not die, brother. You will join the choir. You will remind those who live what it costs to be human." The last thing Cassian saw before darkness claimed him was the wounded rising, one by one, not in rebellion, not in pain, but in reverence. Their eyes glowed faintly gold, and their mouths moved in the same breathless prayer. "He suffers so we may exist." Then, silence. Centuries later, aboard a different ship, another medicae would find an ancient data slate, its surface engraved with spirals, its text indecipherable save for a single line. "To heal is to become the wound." He would not understand its meaning, but he would feel it. And somewhere, deep within the Astronomican's eternal pulse, the faint echo of Cassian's heartbeat would answer. One more voice among countless others. Sustaining the dying god on his throne, the Emperor still burned. Humanity still prayed, and the wound still bled light across the stars.